Well, good afternoon, Senator Grassley. This is Della Schmidt, President and CEO of the Greater Burlington Partnership. So good to hear your voice, sir.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you. And I said I was going to keep my mouth shut, but one thing I'd like to say is that normally you folks come out here with a small delegation, and I assume when we're doing something virtually, I talk to more people from Burlington than I would if you were coming out here with a delegation. Would that be right?
Well, I have not yet had the privilege of coming out to D.C. for the Southeast Iowa delegation. This, as you know, would have been the week for that trip, but I understand it is very well supported and a large number do attend. We've got about 30 people on this call with us today, so that might be close to the number that has traveled out to DC in the past. But again, we're just delighted that you're taking time from your busy schedule to still take some time with us. What we're gonna do is just chat with you for a few minutes, and Jeremy Hess, who's our Director of Economic Development here at the Partnership, is gonna be collecting questions from those who are listening in. And after a few minutes, I'll kind of pitch the conversation over to Jeremy, and he'll kind of share with you some of the questions that that folks are typing into him. Does that sound okay, Senator?
Yeah, that's okay. And I should tell you that in another location, because we're kind of virtual in this office as well, we only have about 20% of our people come in each day of the week. And Sherry is on the someplace listening in, and she may help me answer your questions. But in the meantime, we'll both just listen.
Fantastic. Well, we do want to hear from you as well. You know, between COVID-19 recovery and the unfortunate tragedy that is gripping our nation this last week, we would really like to hear from you. What are the top priorities that you have? What do you see as being the top priorities coming out of our federal branch of government right now?
Okay. I believe that there is going to be a follow-on CARES Act 2. The size and the substance is difficult to say, although you could hear every senator saying about we need to do this or that. And probably won't happen until later on this month or early next month, for the reason that we're just now turning the economy around, and slow or fast, we don't know yet, probably more slow, but we need to know how that's going, because that's going to have something to do with helping people that are unemployed and small businesses and all that. And then the second thing is we still got tens of billions of dollars in the first CARES Act that's not out, and we ought to know how that, or get that out and see how that's affected, and how much, when that's out, how much more is needed. And then we put out already, and it's out, $150 billion to state and local governments, but we don't know how that's spent, and we need to know how that's spent. And so we're going to have another CARES Act. Then for me, although the pandemic has taken a lot of oxygen out of any other issue, because all you talk about is the pandemic, although I had hearings yesterday on filthy pharmaceutical products coming in from China. The other committee deals with education, going to have a hearing next week on safely returning to school, meaning K through 12, and the universities. And then, I don't know, there's 7 hearings this week, so whether they'll lead to anything, we have a short season this year because of the election, all that sort of stuff, but there is other stuff going on other than pandemic, but the pandemic's the only one that gets any attention. For me, though, what I started a year ago on getting prescription drugs down is still going to be one of my major goals, and tomorrow morning I will be taking my team that's dealing with that subject for the Finance Committee down to visit with the White House and see the extent to which we can get the White House further involved, even though the president said in the State of the Union, he mentioned Chuck Grassley and said, I want to sign a prescription drug bill to get costs down. Then there's the subject of infrastructure, more related to roads and highways now than across the board infrastructure. But if we had an across the board infrastructure, that would probably be a great deal of emphasis upon broadband. And we're going to, the 2 weeks of June is going to be taken up by the defense authorization bill. That's an annual process we go through. The subcommittees on appropriations, and maybe even the full committee on appropriations, is meeting on the various appropriation bills. There probably won't be, the Senate's going to be working throughout the rest of June, but the House of Representatives is only going to work one day in the month of June. I suppose because they fear for the pandemic with a large number of people in the House of Representatives and large staffs as a result of 435 people getting together. So I better stop there because I'm not sure that I have in my mind everything that could possibly come up between now and the election.
So you touched on a couple things that I know are very important to us here in Southeast Iowa. And one of them that's top of mind is, of course, our schools, sending our children back to school this fall, seeing colleges and universities start up. Obviously, states have to lead in that in many, many ways. But what do you imagine might be coming from the federal government? You mentioned some hearings have started on that.
Yeah, well, I think the hearings are to make known to everybody what we might get from the experts on getting kids back to school. I presume that other countries are trying that, particularly with elementary kids. It's showing that there's not much danger as you get a little older and obviously into the universities. But I think in Iowa, you could have how it's going to be handled in 350 different school districts in different ways. And I'm not sure anything is set for sure in Iowa on school, except the assumption that we're going to be going back to school. But you got to take into consideration that there's a lot of talk about the winter version of the virus pandemic. And so what do you do if you got a big outbreak? I think there's a lot of stuff we've learned in the last 2 or 3 months that's going to impact anything that happens again, and it's going to happen again. How, we don't know, how much we don't know, but until we get a vaccine, you got to assume that it's going to be around a while. So that's about all I can say about the hearing on education. I'm not on that committee, but I think part of it is to give people some confidence that it's okay to open the schools up, not just for the education of the kids, but just think of the number of families that going back to work is tied to their kids being in school and things of that nature. So if you're turning the economy around, you don't want a lot of mothers and dads that one or the other have to stay home to take care of the kids. And you know that staying at home isn't very good for the kids, both from the standpoint of education as well as their social upbringing.
Well, I certainly hear you there, Senator. One of the things that I've been concerned about is our future workforce, and that with this disruption in education, some of our children may be falling farther and farther behind, and that even puts more strain on our education systems to try to figure out how to help them catch up. So those are weighty matters indeed. Well, we've all been, of course, watching and very aware of the riots and the looting that has happened in large cities across this country. Unfortunately, also here in Iowa, thankfully not here in Southeast Iowa, but in other parts of the state. Do you foresee any role that federal leaders may have in helping businesses that have now been affected twice, first by COVID-19 shutdowns and now by this type of disruption? Do you think there's going to be a role there for the federal government?
If there is, it'll be beyond what private insurance does, because we don't want to preempt private insurance. And so then beyond that, I can't answer your question. But there is other roles for the federal government. Number one, remember what the preamble of the Constitution, one of the purposes of the Constitution was to promote domestic tranquility. So you can see that not only in the body of the Constitution, but in the preamble, you can understand why presidents are saying it's our number one responsibility to maintain the peace. Now, most of that for domestic peace is relied upon by local and state authorities, and always has been and should continue to be that way. But this president has said that he's willing to use the military if it needs to be used. And this morning I heard 3 other presidents of past, I think 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans, where they were committed to doing the same thing during incidents in the United States. The last one to do that would have been H.W. Bush in the California riots of the early 1990s. So that's a very important role. We're going to have a hearing in the Judiciary Committee, I believe it's next week or 2 weeks from now, on the murder of Mr. Mr. Floyd, and also what the role of the federal government ought to be, because first of all, we know the civil liberties of our citizens ought to be preserved. And there's no doubt that you see on television almost every hour the murder of Mr. Floyd. And today, thank God, you're hearing further prosecution of further policemen and the upping of the level of murder on the person that was first charged. We hope some of that will take some of the steam out of the demonstrations you've seen. So this very day, I've had an opportunity to talk to one state legislator that's very much trying to lead people that are demonstrating to be peaceful and yet find areas where we can work together as a society between black and white to make sure that there's peace, but progress being made. I've visited with 2 chiefs of police to get on the ground reactions, because all I get is what you hear on television or radio or print, and I wanted to get firsthand from them. The extent to which I got firsthand information from them, most of it is very peaceful, and when it isn't peaceful, it's usually people infiltrating it for terrorists or looting, robbery, burning, destroying, whether that's for economic reasons that they want to benefit from it, or is it a political statement? I suppose it differs from one group to another. And there's some of that involvement, but there's a feeling on these chiefs of police that I've talked to so far that it's a very small group of people, some of it out of state, but some of it in state, and some of it very sophisticatedly organized.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Happy to know that you are staying on top of information gathering and reaching out to the right people for that. I'm going to pitch this conversation over to Jeremy Hess, our Director of Economic Development. He's been receiving some questions that have been submitted to him while you and I have been visiting, Senator. And so I think we're going to change direction and see what Jeremy has been compiling. Jeremy, you want to take it?
Good afternoon, Senator Grassley. Thanks for being here. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit here. I've got a number of different questions and categories. So the first one and again, I'm ciphering through some of the questions that are in the chat window, so I'm going to do my best to kind of boil them down. I read something personally, but this other individual asks about the payroll protection plan extension. I read something about that. Has that been passed in the House and the Senate is considering it, or do you expect a vote on this, or what can you talk about a possible payroll protection plan extension?
Yeah. We've done, as far as the money's concerned, it doesn't look like there's going to need an extension or more money or even more time to qualify for the money. But when we wrote it, remember this at that time it was 2 2/10 trillion, was put together very quickly between a Thursday and a Sunday night, because the week before the federal government done something we'd never done before. We shut down the economy, and then people that were going to be unemployed would be hurt, and then we had the pandemic to work with at the same time. So two very one of them government instituted, and the other one by the act of God. And we shut the government down. We want to know we're going to help people, help fight the pandemic, and also to get the economy up and running. So we made some mistakes, and one of those mistakes was that we expected the PPP program to be utilized by June the 4th, or you wouldn't get forgivable loan. The House has passed a bill to extend that to December 31st, to reduce from 75% to 60% the amount of money the amount that has to be used for a payroll, so that you got more leeway to pay rent and other costs to running a business. So December 31st for using the labor part, forgivable loan part for labor, things like that are past the House. Now, we're willing to go along with that in the United States Senate, and we were ready Monday to do it by unanimous consent. And I'm ashamed to tell you that 1 or 2 Republicans were holding it up, but I don't think that's going to go on because this is so common sense what we're trying to do to help small business. So those are the things that will be done yet this week, I believe. Although it's difficult when you're dealing with 100 senators and any 1 or 2 senators can hold something up. It's difficult to make a sweeping decision, but I think this falls in the area of anybody trying to stop this, and you know who they are. They're not going to be able to defend their position. So let's say that that's going to be done in that area. So I don't know whether you need, beyond what I'm just talking about, whether you need more legislation, but you can see that we anticipated that June 4th, 2 months ago, would have been a good date, but it ended up not being very realistic, and that's why we changed it, as like changing the 75%. So your next question.
Sure. Let's see here. You talked a little bit about the infrastructure bill, that it does some with the water Quality Act and so forth, and broadband. Do you think that's going to get a vote this year before the election? Is that something that you see a separate bill and getting some attention before the election?
If I can get some unanimity, well, first of all, this is just for the only bill we have before us, because it's only one of 3 committees that have jurisdiction in this area. They're the only ones that produced a bill, so it's bridges and highways. And to get to a 5-year program, the money that the gas tax brings in comes up $93 billion short. So I'm the committee responsible for digging up $93 billion. I got to have a consensus on the committee to do that. I haven't been able to have that consensus yet, but we're working on trying to get that 93 billion together so we could get this bill that actually got out of committee last July 22nd, and still been trying to do that. We thought the major source of income was to increase the gas tax on trucks, heavy trucks, but you could imagine that that didn't fly with a lot of people that heard from the trucking industry. Increasing the gas tax, which is the most simple way to do it for all vehicles, it being an election year, doesn't get support. So where do you go? You go here and there for little pots of money that might add up to $93 billion, but we don't have a consensus on that yet. For broadband and the water stuff you're talking about, particularly if it's a river, if it's a river, what money there is in the diesel tax that was increased about 5 or 6 years ago, I think it's limited to that without passing a bigger infrastructure bill. Except when you brought up water and being there on the Mississippi River, you may be referring to what we call WRDA, that's an acronym, and waste and drinking. We have two bills out of committee, but those are what we call authorization bills. They aren't the actual funding bill, which would be an appropriation bill. Okay, next question.
Multiple questions here about just our relationship when it comes to China, both in trade, the stopping of the purchases of ag products. We've got the whole situation with Hong Kong and Taiwan, and today I understand that flights have been halted or to be halted later in the month between China and the U.S. There's some rough edges there. Just what can you talk about the whole China-U.S. relation in all these areas?
Okay, twice today I've answered this question for Farm Journal TV or some sort of a video program they have, and for another ag program. So if you go watch RFD TV, you might see this here. So let me kind of give you the same answer I did then. First of all, most of the question about trade with China, I think, is coming up because the issue's conflated with the virus problems and our irritation towards China not being transparent, not letting us into their country to see what they know about it, because we think we could benefit from what they know that we don't know, particularly on the origination of it. And then we're irritated with the World Health Organization because we finance it more than any other country, 10 times what China puts in. And they're kind of seem to be an organization protecting China's public relations by not making things public as soon as they should. And one of those would be that they knew before Christmas that this was human-to-human transmittal, but they didn't tell the world that. They wanted the world to believe until about January 20th it was animal-to-human transmission, things like that. So we and the rest of the world are kind of irritated at China. So that leads some political people in Washington to say we ought to end trade with them. I don't agree with that, although I do agree with all the criticism we have of China on the virus. And I don't think China's going to change anything about the treaty just because we're irritated and have trouble with them on the virus. So I've been following this since it was signed in January, went into effect the last week of February, and everything I've determined from my reading, they're faithfully carrying it out. And then Lighthizer, our negotiator, had a teleconference with vice premier of China that does air negotiations, and the report I got from Lighthizer was that China's committed to carrying it out. So I'm not worried about it, but because I was concerned about the president getting pressure, and sometimes he acts very hastily. Last Thursday, he was on flight to Michigan for a speech, and I talked to him on Air Force One from the ground here in Washington, and I brought up with him in maybe no more than a 3-minute conversation that I was hearing all this stuff about ending treaty with China because of the virus issues, and he assured me that he was not inclined to mess around with it. I think he also knows not only is it good economics to trade with China, but it's also politically smart not to upset agriculture that would be most upset if we had a trade war with China.
Well, it's complicated for sure in so many ways. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about our airport here, or ask you to just opine a little bit on that. So our airport, very critical to our businesses and our economy here. How might you think the COVID-19 situation impact our ability to get FAA support for this airport improvement program? So currently in Southeast Iowa, we have a runway reconstruction project underway, and it's been hinted that there might be some delays in that support from the FAA. And so just, can you have a thought, or can you speak about that?
I don't know about construction, but I think I can guarantee you that the essential air service subsidy is going to continue. But I don't know about now, you put in for grants and you got the grants. If you're asking me do I think the grants are going to be fulfilled if you already have applied for them and got certified to get them, I don't think that's a problem.
Okay. We'll go with that. Let's see here. I'm just looking through these questions. Yeah. So really, I think I've worked through most of the questions here. I'd be remiss if I didn't share with you just an urging from one of our business leaders here in our community, Mr. Bob Bartles, with Hope Haven. It's a critical industry and great part of our community. Just the need for increased funding and support of Medicaid, and just the importance that is to these folks, especially those that are what we call direct support professionals. And so anything that you can do to increase funding for public health and social services, emergency fund, those are just super critical to our community and to so many people that are our neighbors. So I'll leave it with that. And if you have a comment, great. If not, I'm going to turn it back to my boss, Della Schmidt.
Yeah, I've heard that concern. I've had telephone conversations on people from Iowa on that. So we're trying to stay on top of it, and I think I have a good reputation for helping special needs people.
Yeah, great.
Well, Senator Grassley, we want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We know that you are busy representing us there at the federal Capitol. We appreciate all the work that you're doing. I'm sure that we all know how to get in touch with you if we have additional questions. And also, sir, if there's something that you're working on our behalf that we can assist you with, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you to everybody who's joined us on the call today. Do you have a parting comment, Senator?
Well, it's always nice to see people face to face, but it's also nice to communicate with more people when you do it virtually. I think I indicated to you, my staff works about 20% each day coming in. The other 4 days a week, they work from home. The same thing for the 5 weeks that we weren't in session. And we're keeping up on our mail pretty well. We're getting a massive amount of it. We're a little bit further behind than usual, but when you can't communicate with me by voice like you're doing right now, then make sure you email me and expect an answer to every email. And if you don't get an answer, write me a nasty note and have me look up and see what happened. You didn't get an answer. So I'll leave it at that, except to say what I usually say at the end of a meeting. Representative government's all about communication with our constituents, and that's my responsibility to come to you, but it's also your responsibility to come to me. And the Burlington Chamber or Partnerships made that possible, so I thank the partnership and want to keep it up and be able to meet the needs of the people of Burlington. So thank you very much, and I'll say goodbye.
Thank you, Senator. Stay safe.
Okay, you bet.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. That concludes today's conversation with our legislators. Have a great day.